Welcome, everybody. It's my pleasure today to introduce Ulderico Fugacci, who will tell us about topology or learning, a naive analysis.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Thanks a lot for the opportunity of speaking at these seminar cycles. As mentioned by Henry, actually today we are going to deal with this fake duality between topology and learning. And with these provocative titles, I would like to start with you I hope a fruitful discussion about this theme with respect to this topic. So let's start. The main aim of this talk is proposing a comparison between different classification methods. I mean, different techniques for perform a classification task. And we analyze various techniques and strategies, some of which are based on persistent homology, some other based on machine learning or deep learning, and we still try to propose some hybrid approaches performing, a combination of those methods. Our goal, as the provocative title may suggest you, actually is provide an analysis that is a little bit different than the standard. Our goal was to perform an analysis that could be as simple, as naive as possible. Let me explain why. We would like to reach a large audience and try to restart from scratch the comparison between learning and topology. For this reason, maybe you are not exactly the proper audience for this talk. Let me explain why. All of us, I think, has a deep knowledge in topology, in TDA, and at the same time, I think has at least some rough idea about learning approaches. And we all know that TDA and learning approaches can be fruitfully integrated in deep manners, and online resources are available, and there is a all-day, everyday growing amount of research literature discussing this theme. And of course, these networks is one of the main channels in which this discussion is made. And so with this kind of analysis, we don't want to discuss how well and deeply integrated these two tools can be combined, but somehow we would like to do exactly the opposite. So in our analysis, we want to consider a different perspective. Probably the proper audience of this talk is a researcher, maybe a computer scientist with no expertise in TDA, asking himself, why should I care about topology? Why should I do the efforts of learning a little bit of this theoretical stuff and apply this stuff to my classification problems? And on the opposite, dually, another possible user of this analysis is a topologist with quite few experience in learning techniques, asking why should I care, what should I face with learning techniques. And in the end, I think that all of us, if we deal with applicative domain, we work every day with this kind of users. And so in the end, I hope that this kind of analysis could help us, each of us, also to provide an answer to this kind of question that, some people ask us not daily, but it happened that we receive this kind of questions. So maybe this kind of talk could be a good starting point for start a discussion. So this is the outline of the talk. It's very simple, as you can expect. That first we discuss the chosen data sets for this kind of comparison and the selected task. Then we perform a short overview of the considered methods in this kind of comparison. And finally, we present the results, compare the effectiveness of the various methods, and we draw some conclusion trying to understand which could be possible future direction of this kind of analysis. So let's start with the data sets, keeping in mind our original goal of being as simple as possible. And sorry if maybe some of you can consider this simplicity a trivial aspect of the analysis. In some sense, all these kind of limits are, drawbacks has been considered. But yes, this is the goal of the analysis is slightly different. So let's start with the two data sets that we have considered in our analysis. We have two public domain data sets consisting of images. One consists of surfaces, wall surfaces, in which we have to detect if the wall, the surface is cracked or not. The other one represent instead images of cells that can be infected or not by malaria. In all the learning approach, actually we split these data sets as a standard in 80% of the data sets is used for training, 20% of which for validation, and 20% for testing. Of course, this kind of splitting is not needed when we have a direct method like the one based on topology. Let's focus a little bit on the two datasets, looking at some images. The CRACS datasets contain approximately 40,000 surface images representing these wall surfaces with varying lighting, finishing, and roughness condition. The dataset is equally split between positive, which means cracked surfaces, and negative, non-cracked surfaces. For efficiency reasons, all the images are resized in a dimension, in a size of 64 by 64 pixels. As you can see, this is not true for all positive images, but positive images often present some black lines representing this cracking in the surface that split, not necessarily enough, but split the surface of the wall, while this kind of lines are not present in negative images. The second dataset that we have considered is the so-called malaria datasets that contain 28,000 cell images taken from 200 individuals that could be infected or healthy. Also, in this case, the dataset is split equally in parasitized positive example and uninfected negative example. And also in this case, we perform a resize of the images. As you can see, in these kind of images, positive examples are often characterized by some stains, some cluster of stains that highlight in the middle in the cells. Before moving forward, I would like to try to address two possible questions that are related to two choices that we made in the construction of this analysis, but that ourselves consider in some sense some limitation. First of all, why considering data sets that just consist of images? Why not considering for having a more effective and more comprehensive analysis? Why not consider also maybe point clouds or graphs, such kind of data? And the other possible limitation or remark that one can move to this kind of choice on the data sets is you all notice that the image has a quite remarkable topological signature. In some sense, for all of us that has at least a small expertise in topology, these kind of images are clearly characterized by the presence of some holes or some topological characteristic that can be exploited for a classification. And the answer to these two questions is because we want to perform our analysis in a sort of comfort zone for both the class of approaches that we want to consider. We all know that learning methods give their best to when dealing with the images, especially deep learning, and at the same time, we all know that any topological analysis need that the data contain a certain kind of topological feature that arise from the data. Otherwise, I mean, if there is no topological signal, I mean, topology fail in perform a good classification. Of course, one could consider data set with a topological signature, which is less prominent, less visible, because in this case, we can spot topological signature also with the naked eye. But in some sense, this choice of making this topological signature visually identifiable, it's made for considering a large audience. And probably a further step of this kind of analysis should prove to the audience, which is not familiar with topological data analysis, that several times topological signature is present in the data, even if it's not immediately visible. So this is, of course, one step further that we would like to do in our analysis. Let's move to the method that we considered in our analysis, and let's start with the methods based on topology. Actually, being the analysis so simple, when we speak about topology-based methods, actually, we mainly focus just on persistent homology as the main tool in TDA. What we would like to do is to extract persistent diagram from images. And still, in light of making everything as simple as possible, we decide to perform the extraction of the persistent diagram by using a quite accessible tool as a RIPSER. And we all know that RIPSER works very well with the Vietor-Rips complex filtrations. And for this reason, we perform pre-processing to transform the image into a point cloud. This point cloud is filtered as producing a Vietor-Rips complex filtration, and then this filtration obviously can produce some persistent diagrams. In our analysis, we find out that in these scenarios, the information of the characterizing information was contained in the one-dimensional persistent diagram. So the one-dimensional loops are the real features that are capable to discriminating and classifying the data in the considered examples. The preprocessing from an image to a point cloud is done by simply performing a sort of threshold, a binarization based on a grayscale value of each pixel. So dark pixel become a black pixel, while the other ones turn to be are converted in white. And in the case, just in the case of Crack's datasets, we decided to add a black border, a sort of framework to each image to enhance the fact that, in this way, as you can see in the cracked surface, we are able to distinguish clearly two cycles, one-dimensional cycles. Then, when we have these persistent diagrams, we perform a classification of the persistent diagrams. Here we have some example of positive and negative example for each datasets. And as I mentioned before, you clearly see that for the positive examples, which are on the left of the slides, you can see that it's quite easy to detect some persistence homological classes. So homological classes with a relevant lifetime, while the same is no longer true for the negative example. And we exploit this fact to perform our classification of this persistent diagram by adopting the two most naive and trivial way to do this kind of analysis. The first method that we call persistent class counting does exactly what is written, simply count the number of homological classes which is relevant and classify a Crack's image as a positive if this number is greater than 1 or negative otherwise, and a similar criterion is applied for malaria datasets, but considering as a threshold 0 instead of 1. A slightly more sophisticated approach is based by considering bottleneck distance of these diagrams with respect to some reference diagrams. So in the second case, we adopt bottleneck distance, while in the first case, we simply count the number of points, of relevant points in the H1 diagrams. So in a nutshell, the two persistent homology-based approach are these two from a dataset. We filter them, we filter all the imaging, turning them in Vietto-Rips complex filtration. We compute persistent diagram, and we classify these diagrams according to these classification rules. Let's move to the machine learning approach. Also, in this case, we try to select the most standard algorithm that we are able to find in the literature. And so we consider three different machine learning approach that are applied on original raw images. So in this case, there is no preprocessing except for the resize that I mentioned before. The first approach is the logistic regression, which all know that is, enable to estimate the class probabilities and is specific effectively for binary classification. Then we consider support vector machine that is capable of finding optimal hyperplane maximizing the separation between classes. Or in the end, we consider also random forest that is capable of classifying data based on some decision trees. And in order to reduce overfitting and in order to enhance accuracy, not just one decision tree is considered, but multiple random decision trees are considered to build this random forest and to make this analysis and the prediction as accurate as possible. Similarly, we consider various deep learning approaches. I mean, I'm not a real expert in the very last advancement of deep learning. I mean, every 6 months the scenario completely change, but we consider 4 of the most common tools in deep learn, the most recognizable learning approach, learning models that at least I know. And so we consider convolutional neural networks, and we consider VGG16, we consider ResNet, which introduced residual connection. We consider Inception V3 that integrate Inception module for capturing multi-scale information. And we also consider MobileNet V2, which is an approach adopting a lightweight architecture specifically designed for mobile application. In case of deep learning approaches, we pre-train these models on ImageNet. That is a large, very large library of images of various natural categories. If I'm not wrong, the size of this library is more than 14 million of images. So it's a pretty rich data sets. And we apply 2 different strategies for the 2 different data sets. Since there is a certain domain similarity between the images of ImageNet and the CRACS datasets, we decided to freeze the pre-train, and we just retrain the final classification layer of those models. Instead, since there is a significant domain shift from the images of ImageNet and the cells that we have in the malaria datasets, we adopt a fine-tuning strategies, retraining the entire model architecture for the malaria datasets in order to obtain better parameters. I mean, I have to admit that at the first step, we try to apply the same strategies adopted for the CRACS datasets, but the results that we obtained for the malaria dataset were very low. And so actually to make this kind of analysis more significant, we decided to retrain the model architecture. And this is probably the fact that we obtained poor results was due to this domain shift. So the typical image of ImageNet is quite different to the images that we have in our malaria datasets. And so this is the reason for, without this retraining, deep learning models struggle to obtain good accuracy. Okay, then the last class of approaches are hybrid approaches. It's a name just for saying that we combine persistent diagrams with machine learning approaches. Actually, we simply transformed persistent diagrams into vectors by using persistent images, and then we classify these persistent images by using the models, the machine learning models that I mentioned before, so logistic regression, SVM, and random forest. So in this case, those hybrid approaches perform this kind of pipeline. So from data to persistent diagrams, then diagrams are vectorized into persistent images, and then a machine learning techniques is applied. Okay, let's try to see the result that we obtained in this kind of analysis. And let's start with persistent. First of all, let's consider some generic facts that we apply to all our experiment. So as mentioned, we try to implement everything by using the most available and the simple tools that we can find online. So we focus specifically on scikit-learn, Ripzer, Persim, and TensorFlow. The code, if you want, is available in GitHub, so feel free to give a look to that. In our analysis, we adopt pretty standard evaluation metrics like accuracy, precision, recall, and the F1 score. And in order to enrich our analysis by trying to understand which parameters play a crucial role in this kind of analysis, we decide to simulate data constraint scenarios by considering random subsampling of the training data. So in some cases, we consider various number of samplings for the training data from 1 to 500 samples per class. So sometimes we consider our training data consisting of just 2 images, one for each class, and sometimes up to 1,000 when we consider 500 samples per class. This choice does not affect the percentage of splitting in which we divide our data set in training, validation, and test sets. Okay.
Ulderico, can I ask a brief question?
Yes.
Yeah, so could you say how you used RIPS on the images? So, because you're not using sublevel set persistence, you're using RIPS on, like, what are the data points again?
I actually, each image.
Is that, yeah.
Each image is transformed in a black and white image. So each pixel is black or white, and
And offsets from, say, the black
are
dot.
points, while white pixel are no longer points of our data. So
Thank you.
yes, so black pixel are points in a two-dimensional space. Yes, and from that we build the Vietor RIPS filtration.
Thanks so
Okay,
much.
let's start with considering persistent homology performances. As you can see, as you remember, we adopted 2 criterion for the classification, simply counting the holes, the persistent holes, or considering the bottleneck distance. As you can see in this table, both the strategies are pretty similar. And so, of course, a bottleneck is provide slightly better results, but nothing so significantly different from the persistent hole counting. And at least, I was a little bit surprised that, in the end, simply applying persistent homology perform pretty accurate and good results. I expected that by applying simply persistent homology, we could obtain something with a lower accuracy. Instead, we obtain definitely good results. So this is a first surprising fact, at least for me. Of course, this is deeply affected by the choice of the data sets and the possible limitation that we discussed before. In terms of confusion matrices, we can see from them that somehow choosing as a classification the tool of bottleneck distance provide a more balanced classification between positive and negative examples. And so if one has to choose one of the 2 methods, obviously I will suggest the second one, so the bottleneck distance. Let's try to introduce the machine learning methods in this kind of analysis. In this table, we consider cracks datasets, and the first bunch of columns represent pure machine learning methods, while the second bunch of columns, machine learning applied to persistent images. Then there are several chunks of row, Each of this chunk contained three machine learning methods considered, so logistic regression, support vector machine, and random forest. And each chunk represents a different number of samples considered per class. As you can see, and maybe in this visualization we obtain a more visual representation of this phenomena, we can see that the method in machine learning are applied straight on the raw images, and so which does not consider persistence, at a certain point reach good accuracy values. These methods are represented by dotted lines, but at the beginning, when the number of sample is pretty limited, they struggle a little bit, but in the end, they reach the results of the machine learning methods integrating applied on persistent images, which differently performed very good accuracy results since the beginning. Already, it's enough one sample per class for achieving already good results. And in this table, in this graph, I put also, a constant green line, which represent the bottleneck distance method, the purely persistent homology-based methods, which is the one performed by considering bottleneck distance. And yes, all the methods need a little bit of time for reaching such results, but in the end, they all achieve a satisfying result in the accuracy. For the malaria dataset, we have a similar scenario, but in this case, actually, the pure machine learning methods struggle a lot in achieving good results. When persistence is integrated in this method, and so when persistent images are considered, again, the more than 90% of accuracy is reached with a limited number of samples, while in the end, when we consider 1,000 samples, machine learning methods struggle to reach the 70% of accuracy. And so we expect that considering more and more samples, we could achieve the same results, but this is something to be considered in our analysis. Let's try to integrate deep learning methods, and let's start with the CRAX datasets. In this case, as you can see, again, there is the parameter of sample considered along our analysis, and they are the result of all the deep learning models that we have considered. In this case, best results are highlighted in dark black, are bold, and you can see that there is not a clear best method, and there is not a clear winner among these methods, but all of them perform quite interesting results. And in up to 5 samples per class, actually they are comparable with the top best approaches discussed before. The situation is different when, this is the same graph, but represented as an histogram that maybe for some of you could be more easy to visualize, to be visualized. Moving to malaria dataset, we have a different, again, scenario, because in this case, some models are able to reach 90% of accuracy, but some others struggle a lot in reaching good results, even if the number of samples is increased. So we can expect this for very low number of samples, but we expected that after 500 samples per class, we could reach a break-even point between persistent-based methods and deep learning methods, but this does not happen, at least on the considered datasets. And again, this is the same graph, but visualized as an histogram. And as you can see, some methods, the orange one, VGG, actually is comparable with the bottleneck distance. Again, also the inception V3, while the two other methods, does not reach 90%. So they cannot consider as good methods, at least for these data sets, in this specific case of such a limited number of samples. In these slides, I try to summarize the top performing methods for each of the two data sets. And as you can see, Bottleneck has a pretty consistent behavior, reaching 96 and 93 accuracy. Machine learning combined with persistent images still perform very good results. Machine learn apply on raw images is able to obtain good results for the crack datasets, but not good result for the malaria datasets. And the best deep learning models, which is different on the two cases, actually in the end, when the number of samples per class is high enough, is obtain comparable result with respect to the other methods. So this is a very naive table just to try to simulate a scenario in which we have up to 50 samples per class, and we have to choose the best methods. And at the beginning of this analysis, I thought that maybe there is no chance that a bottleneck method could be better than some other methods, some machine learning methods or some deep learning methods. But as you can see from this image, from this table, the scenario is more variegated than we could expected at the beginning of this analysis. And of course, we consider these 50 samples as an hypothetical number of samples per class, and we do a sort of average between the two scenarios in order to produce this simplistic table. But really depends on your application domain. In some application domain, 50 samples is nothing, and it's pretty easy to have these 50 samples in the training sets. But in some other situation, this number could be relatively high to be achieved, because maybe you need an expert, you need a physician to validate your data. And so this number in some specific applicative domain could be relatively high. And so for these cases, probably a persistent homology-based method will be the best choice.
Well, Ulderico, can I ask a question about that table?
Sure.
So if I want to compare like machine learning and deep learning, ML and DL, the last two, right?
Yes.
So I look, say, at the ML row, and then I look at the DL column, and it's a red X. So that means deep learning did better than machine learning. Is that right?
Yes. Yes. Typically, machine learning does worse than deep learning. But if you consider the line above, so per sim ML, machine learning with focusing on persistent images, you see that we have a comparable result with respect to the deep learning. Yes, so machine learning by itself, is less powerful than deep learning. But even if we have seen that in certain situations, this is not perfectly true, but machine learning with persistent images is comparable with deep learning models. And something that we can understand of this analysis, of course, is that, I mean, this table considers just the number of samples per class, but another huge parameter to be considered is the, the library of images that is used for the pre-training the model. I think that most of the problem with the malaria datasets arise from the fact that we consider ImageNet which offer images pretty different than the malaria cells that we have in our dataset. And these, even if we retrain the models, it's, I mean, of course, affect the entire computation. I mean, of course, deep learning models are very powerful, but in some scenarios, when we don't have enough samples or we don't have the viability of pre-training our model with a library of images, which is, I mean, reasonable close to our images that we have to test, we could obtain very bad results. I mean, a pure methods based on persistent homology could achieve better results. To conclude, it is actually what I was saying right now. In situation of data scarcity and when we have to deal with a specific domain as medical images, topological methods shows that they offer very significant advantage with respect to learning methods, while deep learning models obviously provide very good results when we have sufficient data. But as I mentioned before, another aspect to be considered is the domain similarity to the pre-training sets. If there is a domain shifting, the deep learning models could perform very bad result. And of course, I'm saying a long list of trivial trivial facts that probably we all know, but I think that this kind of analysis could be helpful for some of us. And another thing to do is that actually when we have high sample regimes, there is no a single method that really excels and outperform the others. And so this could be a great hint for always considering an integration, hybridation between different methods. So in conclusion, what we have seen is this comparative analysis that, as the title suggests, was very naive and trivial, or start from scratch to comparing persistent homology approaches and learning approaches. We focus on limited data scenarios. And of course, this represents a preliminary analysis. I mean, I don't want to lie to you. I mean, it's a first step in a direction that we want to further investigate. And during the talk, I think I stress enough on some possible limitation of this analysis that I hope that could bring to future developments. And for instance, something that I would like to do is to consider different integration between persistent homology, TDA approaches, and learning, something more deep and more interesting as the usage of topological losses and stuff like that, but without affecting the fact that this kind of analysis could be quite accessible to a large audience. And more or less, this is all for today. I would like to thank the two co-authors of this paper, which is the main reference for these talks. And I would like also to thank the project that believe on this kind of analysis and support my and our works. And that's all for today. Thanks a lot for your attention. And if you have any question, it will be great for me start a discussion. I thought for a while about which kind of mm, topic I could bring to this network. And I hope that even with some limitation, could this topic could start a discussion among us and start, yes, if there are any curiosity, I'm here to try to reply.
Fantastic. So before we get to questions, let's briefly unmute ourselves and applaud for the speaker. So the first question is actually in the chat. Can you compare these approaches also in terms of computational cost?
Yes, I mean, this is another limitation that we want to integrate. Actually, mm, I mean, the cost is, I mean, since we applied quite, available tools in online, I think that available tools not always provide the best performances in terms of computational efficiency. So for that reason, we don't include that in our analysis. And another aspect that prevent us to include this kind of comparison was to the fact that we perform some resize in the images, especially for limiting the computational costs. I mean, on one side, the bottleneck of the computation of networks is definitely the training cost. On the other sides, we have that the main problem is that the computation of filtration and persistent diagram is pretty fast, but not fast enough if we have to consider millions of computation of these kinds. So depends on your availability of time. I mean, they could somehow match, but the time and cost. But I mean, this is an aspect that I want really further investigate because I don't have real numbers. So yes, thanks.
Any questions from folks? Yes, Dave, please go ahead.
Yes, so I enjoyed the talk very much. So I was looking at thinking ahead when you got to your final points, and that second point you raised about strong signals came up. Of course, the crack data set has a very strong signal.
Yeah.
One natural thing to do, and perhaps you've already moving in that direction, would be to add noise to the crack signals data set.
Yeah.
Control the noise in some way, and also add noise to the control, and see how these methods work for that. Certainly, if you're doing persistent images should take care of some of the noise.
Yeah.
But that seems like one simple thing to do at this point without finding other data sets that are useful.
Thanks. Great idea. Yes, you're right. Yes, this should, yes, exactly answer to my question of looking for something with, yes, less prominent topological features. Yeah. Thanks.
Let's go to Massimo.
Yes, ciao, Ico.
Massimo.
I liked very much your hybrid model, and I think that integrating the two sides of this thing is wonderful. And you did it downstream to the use of machine learning downstream with respect to persistence. But I think that there is also a possibility of hybridization upstream, in the sense that, as you surely know, in our team, we use different filtering functions. Okay, you used as more than 90% of researchers, you used Vietoris RIPS, okay. But there are also other filtering functions, and in our experience, we chose the filtering functions by discussing with experts. One way of using machine learning could be to have a lot, or even better, a parameterized set of filtering functions, and having the machine learning, one of the machine learning methods, SVM, deep learning, whatever, to decide what the best filtering function might be for that particular classification task. And that would also help explainable AI, which is,
Yes.
is extremely important.
Yes, that's another great observation. Yes, you're right. I mean, yes, we could exploit learning for help us to understand which is the right pair of glasses to be used for to characterize, to visualize the data. Yes. This is another great perspective of using learning. Yes, of course. Yeah.
Let's go to John's question. I'll read it out loud, but John, feel free to unmute yourself and read it yourself if you'd like. So John asks, might this be relevant for a transformer system?
Sorry, I was taking a note about.
Yes, it's in the chat as well. It says, might this be relevant for a transformer system?
I don't know. I don't think. I don't have an answer for that. No, I don't know.
No worries. Let's move to Ava's question. Again, I'll read it, but Ava, feel free to say it if you prefer. So Ava asks, do you think these results can be broadly expected to hold up in different kinds of data sets that are in point cloud format? For example, omics data sets. What hurdles would you expect in those data sets?
What? Sorry? What word?
Omics data sets, OMICS.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I know almost nothing about this kind of a specific data set, so I don't know. But I think that, I mean, our analysis focus on images rather than point cloud for practical reason, but there is no real reason to not considering point cloud data sets. And as you have seen, actually, then in some sense, at least Vietoris filtration deal with point clouds. And so even if we started with a point cloud, even if we started from an image, we transform it into a point cloud to apply RIPSer. And so in that sense, I mean, the persistent-based approaches that we presented will be somehow and are not afraid of this because we need a less one step less of preprocessing for the persistent-based approaches, while yes, also I mean, also deep learning methods and learning methods, I think, will not be affected so much by this choice because also them can easily deal with point cloud. So I don't have an answer, but I don't think that the analysis could change drastically the final results.
More questions? Well, if not, thanks so much, Ulderico, and let's stop the recording here.
Thanks a lot to all of you, and yes, it has been a real pleasure.
Mm-hmm.